I pull evening shifts as an emergency room technician at Olympic Medical Center located in Port Angels, working Monday through Friday. On most weekends, I dedicate my time either to training sessions with Clallam County Search and Rescue or to catching up on rest after whatever unsettling experiences occurred during the previous week. The two roles appear as if they should counteract one another, and honestly, they frequently do. Yet the search and rescue assignments carry a completely separate feel from the hospital duties in a manner that's tough to articulate clearly, which is why I generally avoid attempting any explanation. That specific Friday, I drove in the direction of the national park alongside Randy Harris, using my aging Tacoma pickup, the vehicle still featuring that cracked mirror on the passenger door, which I repeatedly intended to replace, but never did. Randy positioned his bulky external frame backpack crammed tightly behind the front seat, while his convenience store coffee sat cooling slowly in the center console cup holder. He tends to remain fairly quiet throughout most drives, and the same holds true for me. That mutual silence actually forms one of the main reasons we function so effectively as a team. Randy, at 29 years old, possesses the solid, muscular build of a former high school football player who maintained his workout routine long after graduation. Sandy-colored hair usually concealed beneath a plain gray beanie, pale eyes that convey steadiness, and facial features that project calm regardless of internal tension. Among everyone I've encountered in this line of work, he stands out as the single most disciplined and serious individual. Not in a depressing or morbid sense, simply intensely focused at all times. Plenty of volunteer search and rescue members lean on grim sarcasm or black humor to endure particularly difficult operations, but Randy never resorts to that. He simply stays locked in on the task ahead. I've always found that approach perfectly acceptable. Around 3 o'clock in the afternoon, we pulled into the parking area close to the Spruce Railroad Trail trailhead. Lake Crescent stretched out immediately adjacent, its water appearing dull gray and unnaturally smooth beneath the thick overcast sky, and the unmistakable scent of incoming rain already hung heavily in the atmosphere. Precipitation hadn't begun falling yet, but the threat felt very close. According to recent forecasts, the strait had continually forced weather systems moving inland throughout the entire week, and standing where we were, it was possible to observe the cloud ceiling steadily descending across the ridge situated to our north. Jasmine Lee stood waiting beside the ranger station, which in reality consists merely of a modest auxiliary building positioned right at the parking lot perimeter. I had participated in several previous callouts together with Jasmine. Serving as the assigned duty ranger stationed in this area for a number of years now, she conducts mission briefings with the same efficiency and directness I apply when performing triage, rapid, unambiguous, stripped of all superfluous language. She already had her waterproof rain jacket zipped up and her braided hair neatly secured beneath the flat-brimmed ranger hat. "Really glad you both showed up," she stated, that brief sentence serving as her entire form of welcome. She retrieved a printed backcountry permit document along with a detailed topographic map bearing a single pencil-circled spot. The individual reported missing went by the name David Austin, 44 years of age, traveling alone as a backpacker originating from Tacoma. He had obtained a 3-day wilderness permit designating a campsite vicinity near Barnes Creek, with an intended checkout scheduled for Thursday morning, already exceeding 30 full hours past due. His vehicle, a gray Subaru Outback, remained parked at the distant end of the lot. No checkout had occurred, and he failed to respond to the routine ranger contact attempt at the trailhead registration point. Absolutely no communication whatsoever. The incoming weather system is advancing more rapidly than originally predicted, Jasmine continued. You probably have around 4 hours of workable daylight remaining, and quite likely even less once the downpour truly begins. I examined the topo map closely. The Barnes Creek campsite location appeared approximately 3 miles inward, no especially challenging terrain, simply a well-maintained, straightforward path suitable for an out-and-back journey. Jasmine briefly pointed out the presence of several historic railroad tunnels situated along the route. The Spruce Railroad Trail passes directly through a small number of them, relatively short passages, each measuring perhaps 60 meters or so. In truth, the tunnels themselves pose no particular concern. They're merely tunnels. Our operational plan remained uncomplicated. Proceed along the trail, locate David Austin, then either escort him back out under his own power or arrange helicopter extraction depending entirely upon his physical condition at the time of contact. 3 miles total distance across territory we knew reasonably well, all to be completed prior to full darkness. I had handled far more demanding missions under significantly worse environmental conditions in the past. Genuine worry did not factor into my mindset at that moment. Randy and I completed final gear preparations right there inside the parking lot. I double-checked the contents of my personal first aid kit, fastened my emergency rescue whistle securely to the front of my search vest, and wedged my waterproof rain shell into the uppermost section of my backpack for quickest access. Randy had already lifted his heavy frame pack onto his shoulders and began methodically adjusting the various straps purely by feel, the automatic motion that develops after hundreds upon hundreds of repetitions. Jasmine provided us with her current radio operating frequency together with her personal cell phone contact number, emphasizing that we should transmit a status update immediately upon arrival at the intended campsite. Stay vigilant regarding weather changes, she instructed. We always do, Randy responded calmly. With that, we started walking. The section of trail running parallel to the lake actually qualifies as quite scenic. Normally, I pay little attention to aesthetic details during missions, yet the Spruce Railroad Trail remains consistently flat, excellently groomed, and traces the northern shoreline of Lake Crescent while winding through stands of second-growth fir trees intermixed with cedar, all built upon the foundation of an abandoned logging-era rail bed that was repurposed long ago. Under favorable weather, it makes for a genuinely enjoyable stroll. At that point, conditions hovered between mediocre and acceptable. Overcast skies combined with cool air, like water just beginning to develop small choppy waves from increasing wind. We maintained a brisk yet sustainable hiking pace. Randy established the rhythm, and I matched it stride for stride. Verbal exchange stayed minimal between us. My thoughts revolved around the permit information while mentally reviewing typical case patterns. When a solitary backpacker fails to check out after a 3-day itinerary, the explanation most frequently turns out to be a minor injury like a rolled ankle, an exhausted phone battery preventing contact, or simply a person who became so absorbed in the surroundings that time slipped away unnoticed. On other occasions, the cause involves a sudden cardiac incident. Far less commonly, it involves circumstances that fall outside ordinary explanations. I deliberately refrained from allowing my mind to drift toward darker possibilities just yet. Years of experience have repeatedly demonstrated that the most mundane and boring interpretation usually proves correct in the end. Roughly 40 minutes after beginning the hike, something caught my attention. We had reached a gravel-covered portion of trail immediately preceding the entrance to the first tunnel, the place where the path naturally widens slightly and seasonal runoff from the higher slope crosses over it diagonally. Moist gravel of that sort captures and retains impressions remarkably well. Multiple standard boot prints already marked the surface, fresh enough to suggest recent passage by other hikers earlier that week. However, one particular track caused me to freeze mid-step. The print appeared unusually broad, spanning approximately the width of an adult hand spread fully open, perhaps marginally wider still, featuring 5 stubby, blunt impressions at the forward edge. These marks displayed no tapering whatsoever, unlike normal finger shapes. Instead, they pressed down flatly and evenly. Immediately behind this set of marks extended a long, clearly intentional drag smear, evidence of considerable downward force, followed by deliberate backward movement across the gravel before whatever created it lifted away from the ground entirely, strongly implying an initial 4-point stance that transitioned into a standing posture. I dropped to one knee directly beside the track for closer inspection. Randy halted immediately behind my position. "That looks like bear sign," he observed quietly. I continued studying the impression for several additional seconds. The perimeter edges remained far too sharply defined for typical bear tracks. Bears generally produce smeared, blurred outlines when moving across loose gravel surfaces. Moreover, they virtually never leave 5 distinct forward-projecting blunt points in that configuration. The drag mark exhibited unmistakable directionality and purpose, while the pressure exerted had displaced surrounding gravel particles outward into a noticeably uniform raised border all around the print. "Could be," I answered aloud, choosing not to voice the additional suspicions forming in my mind. Internally, I reasoned that the mark probably meant nothing significant, possibly the result of some hiker's practical joke, an unusual natural erosion pattern, or even a regular boot print that had become strangely distorted while the ground remained saturated. People frequently leave peculiar traces in wilderness settings. On multiple prior occasions, I had witnessed far stranger markings ultimately receive perfectly rational explanations. The suspicious print clearly pointed in the direction of the approaching tunnel. Standing again, I gazed toward the entrance roughly 30 meters farther along the path, a simple rectangular opening framed in stone, filled with absolute darkness of the variety that a strong headlamp beam slices through effortlessly. No legitimate obstacle presented itself. I had traversed that exact tunnel during previous training exercises and familiarization hikes. It amounted to nothing more than a disused historic rail passage, completely ordinary. Randy remained silent for a brief interval before speaking again. "Are we continuing inside? We still have a missing backpacker to locate." His question effectively closed the discussion. Our training protocol demands that we evaluate potential hazards and proceed forward unless confronted with a clear, specific, and immediate safety threat requiring immediate withdrawal. A solitary, anomalous footprint pressed into wet gravel failed to meet that threshold. We dealt with an individual already missing and out of contact for over 30 hours while a major storm system approached the ridgeline from the north. Abandoning the search never qualifies as the default or initial response. It simply never does. I activated my headlamp with a click. Randy followed suit with his own. Together, we entered the tunnel. The environmental conditions altered instantaneously upon crossing the threshold: noticeably colder temperature, markedly higher humidity level, and a distinctive musty aroma combining wet stone with aged, weathered wood. Our footsteps produced flat, dull echoes bouncing off the enclosing walls. I directed my light beam steadily forward and maintained forward progress without hesitation. Later research revealed the tunnel's approximate length measured around 400 meters end to end. During the actual passage, it merely registered as feeling unusually prolonged. Approximately midway through the length, Randy spoke in a subdued tone. "Footsteps." He uttered the single word without inflection, not posing it as a question, merely stating an observation. I immediately stopped walking. He stopped simultaneously. The footsteps, which I had registered subconsciously until the moment he identified them verbally, ceased at precisely the same instant. Identical timing, identical pause duration. Whatever produced those sounds had been traveling in perfect synchronization with our own pace and elected to mirror our sudden halt exactly. I remained motionless, silently counted to 3 inside my head, then pivoted around and swept my headlamp beam back toward the entrance direction. Mist partially obscured the gentle leftward curve of the tunnel walls, rendering the original opening invisible from our current position. Nothing appeared except glistening damp stone surfaces, airborne moisture droplets sparkling within the light cone, and the rusted remnants of old rail tracks disappearing backward into utter blackness. No visible human figure, no animal silhouette, no identifiable object that could account for the audible phenomenon. I lingered in that turned position considerably longer than strictly necessary. "Bear again," Randy stated flatly. "Possibly," I replied, though both of us understood the explanation rang false. Bears do not pause movement precisely when a person pauses. They do not replicate stride cadence step by step with perfect accuracy before freezing in exact unison. That pattern deviates entirely from documented bear behavior. Through wilderness first aid certification courses and specialized search and rescue training conducted specifically within Olympic National Park boundaries, I have acquired solid working knowledge of bear conduct. Additionally, during the past 4 years, I personally participated in extracting 2 separate individuals from encounters involving black bears. Bears behave noisily, reactively, and unpredictably, never in the controlled, mirroring fashion we had just experienced. Nevertheless, I voiced the word possibly aloud because entertaining alternative explanations offered no practical value whatsoever in that precise moment. I turned forward once more and resumed walking. For the remainder of our passage through the tunnel, no additional sounds materialized from behind us. Paradoxically, that prolonged silence proved almost more disturbing than any continuing footfalls would have been, because I found myself straining intently to detect even the slightest noise. We finally emerged from the opposite end directly into falling rain, cold, steady precipitation of the sort that immediately works its way inside clothing collars and refuses to depart. I drew my hood upward over my head and retrieved the folded permit printout I had stored inside my chest pocket for quick reference. According to the document, David Austin's assigned campsite branched off via a minor side trail near Barnes Creek, situated perhaps 600 meters to the northeast. The connecting path appeared faint, far more of an informal user-created route than any officially maintained trail, yet remained discernible enough if one actively searched for it. I located the junction point and made the turn. Randy stepped in behind me without uttering a single comment. Before the creek itself became visible through the trees, its steady low-frequency white noise reached my ears. As always during approach phases of a search operation, I mentally tracked elapsed distance by counting my own paces in my head. Based upon both the permit description and the topographic map I had reviewed thoroughly earlier that morning, I anticipated reaching the campsite vicinity at approximately the 400-meter mark along the side trail. In actuality, we arrived noticeably sooner, closer to the 250-meter point. That discrepancy registered as my initial point of genuine unease. My internal distance calculations contained no error. The physical location simply existed significantly closer to the main trail than indicated on official documentation. I halted right at the outer edge of the tree cover and carefully surveyed the campsite area. A blue tarp had been strung tautly between 2 mature hemlock trees, stretched perfectly level from side to side, with every corner pulled equally tight, and each tie-out line angled at precisely the same degree on both opposing sides. That degree of symmetry simply does not occur during typical backcountry tarp setups. Real people in wilderness conditions pitch shelters hurriedly, accepting minor sagging, uneven ridge lines, and asymmetrical heights, because exhaustion, cold fingers, and pressing need for rain protection override perfectionism. This arrangement looked more like an instructional diagram from an outdoor equipment catalog than actual field practice. Directly underneath, the tarp sat a tan-colored Osprey brand 65-liter backpack standing completely upright upon its internal frame, lid fully zipped closed and positioned dead center, neither leaning against any tree trunk nor tipped sideways onto the ground. The pack appeared deliberately placed and leveled with care. I stepped forward and examined the established fire ring. Ashes inside had cooled completely, yet the entire circle remained strikingly free of any food-related debris, no scraps, no discarded packaging remnants, no traces of scorched aluminum foil from freeze-dried meal pouches. Nearly every backcountry camper burns at least something while occupying a site: the wrapper from a meal packet, the foil seal from a snack bar, virtually anything lightweight that reduces pack-out trash volume. This particular fire ring looked almost deliberately swept spotless. No peripheral scatter of small particles existed around the encircling stones whatsoever. Randy directed his headlamp beam onto the backpack itself. "He definitely occupied this spot at some point," he commented, though clearly not within the last several hours. I nodded in agreement while continuing to process the timeline mentally. The permit record documented Austin checking into the backcountry Wednesday morning, with an expected departure Thursday evening. Jasmine had officially flagged him as overdue early Friday upon noticing continued absence. Therefore, at some interval between Wednesday afternoon and Thursday evening, he had erected this campsite, then departed in a direction other than the logical return path toward the trailhead parking area, leaving him exposed to elements for a minimum of 30+ continuous hours. My mind shifted to hypothermia symptom progression stages, and whether an individual enduring that duration in current ambient temperatures could realistically remain capable of self-movement. At that exact moment, the tarp surface moved. The motion originated neither from wind nor from any draft penetrating the dense overhead canopy. Inside that sheltered tree cover, virtually no air current existed, and whatever raindrops managed to filter through fell straight downward in vertical lines. Instead, this constituted a gradual, purposeful central depression originating from directly above, as though significant weight pressed downward onto the exterior tarp fabric from outside, followed by slow release, then renewed pressure repeating in a consistent pattern. Each complete cycle lasted perhaps 4 to 5 seconds. Immediately, I raised my headlamp beam upward into the branches suspended directly over the tarp structure. Nothing whatsoever appeared, merely hemlock boughs, dripping rainwater, wet needles glistening. No perched animal, no concealed human figure, no object snagged or resting atop the material. I maintained the light beam fixed in position for a solid 20 seconds or longer, methodically scanning back and forth in overlapping grid search sweeps, the identical technique employed when scanning open hillsides for downed subjects. Still nothing materialized. Only the tarp fabric continued its rhythmic downward sag, followed by upward recovery, while I stood directly beneath empty branches staring upward. "Dakota," Randy spoke in an extremely low, deliberately flat register, the precise vocal tone he employs when he intends to convey urgency without raising volume noticeably. "I see what's happening," I answered quietly. "We need to get out of here immediately. Not until we locate Austin." He paused briefly. "He isn't present in this location. Only his belongings remain." That argument carried little persuasive weight, and deep down I recognized its weakness. The continued presence of gear provided no proof of physical proximity. The meticulously staged equipment placement, the swept-clean fire ring, the independently moving tarp, none of those factors implied Austin waited nearby. In fact, they possibly suggested the precise opposite scenario. Nevertheless, my fundamental temperament refuses to permit walking away from an active missing person case solely because ambient circumstances begin feeling profoundly wrong. That refusal forms the central essence of search and rescue work. Situations inevitably feel wrong at some point, yet the responder stays engaged regardless. "Allow me 10 more minutes," I told Randy. "We examine the creek shoreline area and then we make the final call." Randy offered neither verbal affirmation nor objection. He simply began walking alongside me, which represents his standard operational mode. Barnes Creek flowed perhaps 40 meters downslope from the campsite through a short incline densely covered in sword ferns. The creek bank consisted of dark, saturated mud, exactly the type of soft surface that preserves every footprint with exceptional clarity. While scanning the ground ahead, I nearly stepped directly onto the object. Austin's cell phone rested atop a flat, level rock positioned right at the waterline edge. Model: Samsung Galaxy, mid-tier variant. Screen remained illuminated and active. The automatic lock timer had apparently not yet engaged, either because battery charge hovered critically low and brightness refused to dim further, or because someone had physically handled the device quite recently. Using only thumb and forefinger, I carefully lifted it. The camera application stayed open in foreground. Timestamp on most recent photograph captured: Thursday evening at 6:14 p.m., precisely 18 hours prior to Jasmine officially documenting him overdue. Confirmation existed. He had occupied this exact spot. He had taken at least one photograph. Then, for reasons unknown, he placed the phone down onto a creekside rock and departed permanently. The captured image displayed severe motion blur, resulting either from rapid camera movement during exposure or from shooting an object positioned extremely close to the lens, yet enough detail remained recognizable. The subject consisted of the tunnel entrance itself, specifically the stone archway framing the opening, photographed from an estimated distance of 1 meter or possibly less. Not the surrounding trail, not adjacent forest, solely the dark void of the tunnel mouth centered in frame. Shot during fatting evening twilight conditions, thereby establishing that Austin returned to the tunnel location after first establishing his campsite here, and after already having passed through the tunnel once earlier. He had gone back intentionally. Standing in steady rain with droplets pattering against the rear of my hood, I examined that single photograph far longer than strictly required, mentally reconstructing the sequence of events, and finding the emerging narrative deeply troubling. Our own inbound route followed logical progression. Trailhead parking right, arrow tunnel passage, northeastward continuation to Barnes Creek campsite. My working assumption had been that Austin established camp, ventured outward exploring or gathering water, then suffered injury, disorientation, or some incapacitating event. The classic lost hiker pattern. However, the photo timestamp placed him standing immediately outside the tunnel entrance during Thursday evening hours, well after completing camp setup. He had meticulously arranged and staged all his equipment, then deliberately retraced steps back toward the tunnel, approaching close enough to capture the dark opening at arm's length under low-light conditions, before abandoning his phone on a convenient flat rock beside running water and disappearing completely. I lifted my gaze toward Randy. He had viewed the image clearly over my shoulder. "He never became disoriented or lost anywhere around here," I stated. Randy directed his attention toward the flowing creek. "No, he most certainly did not." I placed the recovered phone securely inside my own pocket. First action, attempt radio communication. Complete dead silence resulted, not even background static, simply total absence of signal, as though the unit had forgotten its intended function. Next, cell phone check, already anticipating failure. 0 reception bars displayed. Raising the device skyward changed nothing. Radio appears non-functional, I reported. Mine registers the same, Randy confirmed after his own quick inspection. The Barnes Creek drainage topography reliably disrupts radio and cellular signals during stormy weather. Northern ridgeline combined with dense forest canopy effectively block transmission paths. Marginal single-bar coverage had existed during our inbound journey. That weak link had now vanished entirely. Our only viable return route to the trailhead parking area required retracing steps, meaning another passage directly through the same tunnel we had just exited. I remained silent for several moments, half-hopping Randy might propose an alternate path forward. He offered none. "We have to go back through the tunnel," he stated plainly. "Agreed," I answered. Rain intensity had noticeably increased during our brief time at the creek. I maintained focus on keeping my headlamp beam trained steadily along the trail surface, deliberately avoiding any further glances toward the water. Randy walked close behind. His breathing pattern remained measured and completely controlled. One of his defining field characteristics involves never succumbing to visible panic under pressure. The tunnel entrance loomed ahead, appearing exactly like a black void carved into the hillside with nothing discernible beyond it. Remaining daylight had largely disappeared beneath advancing storm clouds. I swept my light across the opening, confirming familiar gravel surface and familiar damprock scent, then stepped inside first. Roughly 10 feet past the threshold along the left-hand wall, I nearly overlooked the anomaly. A lateral swing of my beam suddenly illuminated it clearly. A compact bundle consisting of small sticks combined with dried grass had been tightly wedged into a narrow crack within the concrete lining, positioned at approximately chest height, small overall size, yet densely constructed and woven securely enough to maintain structural integrity without any underlying support. I stopped dead in my tracks. Randy immediately moved up beside me. For several seconds, we both stared wordlessly at the object. It absolutely had not existed during our initial inbound passage through the tunnel, of that I felt completely certain. Standard operating procedure requires scanning both tunnel walls thoroughly upon entry, specifically checking corners, alcoves, and recesses for concealed persons or animals. I had performed exactly that sweep earlier using my headlamp. Both walls stood completely bare at that time. Approximately 8 feet farther along on the opposite right-hand wall appeared a second identical construction. Same materials, same approximate dimensions, same chest-level placement. Continuing forward, I counted 7 separate nests before ceasing individual tallies. They extended at regular intervals along both walls for the entire remaining length of the passage. Placement appeared far from random, spacing looked measured and deliberate. Someone had recently fabricated and positioned them intentionally. Peering closely into one nest revealed approximately 12 individual teeth arranged inside. I counted twice to confirm. Composition included several small flat molars alongside a smaller number of longer, sharper incisors, plus one noticeably oversized specimen too large for typical adult human dentition and excessively pale to represent anything recently shed. Arrangement followed clear, intentional pattern, rough circular layout featuring alternation between larger and smaller teeth, suggesting purposeful design rather than haphazard deposit. Despite mounting unease, I forced myself to continue advancing, while internally repeating that the entire display constituted an elaborate prank. Hikers occasionally engage in highly peculiar behavior deep in wilderness areas. I've personally observed lawn chairs dragged to absurdly remote ridgelines, surveyors' tape knotted into incomprehensible geometric patterns, personal names carved into cliff faces hundreds of feet above any established trail. Isolation and vast surroundings sometimes trigger strange impulses. That rationalization remained available, and I clung to it tightly because it represented the sole explanation permitting continued forward movement. The critical flaw in that theory involved strict chronology. We had traversed this tunnel roughly 2 hours earlier. No nests existed during that passage. 2 hours provided utterly insufficient time for any individual or group to construct 14 separate stick-in grass structures, collect and precisely arrange exactly 12 teeth per nest, then position all 14 units at perfectly even intervals spanning approximately 300 linear feet of tunnel corridor. Basic mathematics rendered the prank theory logistically impossible. I chose to keep that particular observation entirely to myself. Randy had already adopted his characteristic deep processing silence. The last thing needed involved supplying additional reason for him to halt progress entirely. We had covered roughly 2/3 of the tunnel length when the next event occurred. A human voice suddenly emanated from somewhere behind our position, originating not from the entrance side we had entered through, but rather from deeper inside, the very direction we currently advanced toward. The voice spoke Randy's first name only. Volume stayed low. Delivery sounded wet and slightly garbled, as though the speaker's throat contained accumulated water or mucus. Simply Randy, followed immediately by dead silence. Randy halted instantly. I stopped walking as well. Rather than turning immediately, I counted silently to 3 inside my head, then pivoted around while sweeping my headlamp beam backward along the passage. Mist partially filled the gentle curve of the far wall. Nothing else appeared. No visible figure, no identifiable shape, no discernible source capable of producing the voice we had clearly heard. Yet the spoken word had registered as originating quite close by. That didn't qualify as any kind of echo, Randy stated firmly. No, it didn't, I agreed completely. We had uttered no preceding words capable of reflecting back in that manner. I quickly unclipped my rescue whistle from the front vest attachment point, standard orange Fox 40 model enclosed in protective case, carried reliably on every SAR assignment throughout the past 4 years. The device produces extremely loud, piercing sound capable of carrying significant distance even under wet conditions, specifically designed to snap individuals out of dangerous psychological states during crises. Right then, I desperately needed something concrete, something unmistakably real and sharply audible. Anything capable of shattering the peculiar oppressive atmosphere that had gradually enveloped us inside that confined tunnel space. I drew a deep breath and blew the whistle as hard as physically possible. No reverberation occurred whatsoever. Inside a long concrete tunnel, any loud noise should produce multiple bouncing reflections, layered, overlapping returns arriving from both directions simultaneously. Instead, this sound projected outward and simply vanished, absorbed completely, as though encountering an invisible barrier. I stood motionless for several seconds, simply registering that physical impossibility. Then, from the deepest recesses of the tunnel, from precisely the same far-end direction the voice had originated, an identical single note returned. Perfect pitch match to my original blow. Not an echo. Echoes arrive instantaneously, suffer slight degradation, return audibly weaker and marginally off-key. This response manifested clean, deliberate, patient, as though deliberately captured, held briefly, then released with exact intentional replication. I locked eyes with Randy. "We need to leave right now," I said. We began running. Running inside enclosed tunnel environments carries substantial risk: uneven footing surfaces, unexpected drainage channels crossing the path, wildly distorted shadows thrown by curving walls, severely impaired depth perception under artificial light. Despite every hazard, we ran anyway. I clearly heard Randy's heavy boots pounding close behind me. Neither of us slowed pace until gray daylight suddenly appeared ahead, marking the exit opening. We burst outside and continued sprinting another 20 feet beyond before finally stopping and turning around. The tunnel entrance remained perfectly still and silent. No pursuit followed. Randy bent forward at the waist with both hands braced on his knees, breathing heavily. "Okay," he managed between breaths. "Yeah," I answered simply. We immediately resumed rapid movement toward the main trailhead parking area. The old converted rail bed pathway runs wide, mostly straight, and I possessed clear mental mapping of remaining distance, estimating approximately 40 minutes required to reach the truck under sustained fast pace, possibly 35 if we pushed harder. 8 minutes into that leg, I spotted the obstruction. A massive cedar tree lying completely across the trail, trunk measuring roughly 2 feet diameter at the break point. Freshly exposed pale yellow heartwood contrasted sharply against weathered gray outer bark. Foliage attached to down branches continued subtle settling motion, not wind-induced, simply residual vibration from very recent impact. No such fallen tree had existed during our inbound journey. I approached and placed one hand directly onto the freshly broken surface. Interior wood felt completely dry beneath outer layers. This tree had fallen sometime after our earlier passage, within the past 2.5 hours, which defies normal tree falling behavior absent external force or trigger. Attempting to bypass uphill around the obstacle proved impossible. Slope angle became excessively steep, while underbrush grew far too dense for safe passage in darkness. We dropped down to the lakeshore route instead, I proposed. Randy voiced no disagreement. We immediately descended toward Lake Crescent and picked up the narrow shoreline footpath, rocky, and constricted between wave-lapped water on one side and dense tree line on the other. Rain now drove in sideways sheets. Lake surface appeared rough and uniformly gray. I kept my headlamp beam directed low and forward while moving at accelerated pace. Approximately 40 feet ahead, a solitary figure stood motionless at the exact water's edge. I stopped abruptly. Randy halted directly behind me. Shape appeared roughly my own height, wearing what initially registered as a standard rain jacket, standing perfectly still while facing outward across the lake. No visible movement occurred. Following standard protocol, I called out clearly, "Search and rescue here, are you okay?" Complete silence answered. I raised my light beam higher and swept it slowly across the figure from head to toe. The supposed jacket maintained correct general outline and natural shoulder drape, yet surface texture appeared completely wrong, unnaturally uniform and seamless with absolutely no visible stitching, zippers, or panel joins detectable anywhere. Fabric, or whatever material composed it, moved in perfect synchronization with underlying form in a manner ordinary clothing never achieves: tight, continuous, unbroken continuity. Shifting focus downward, I examined the hands, and that detail shattered any remaining attempt at normalization. Fingers appeared far too numerous, not elongated unnaturally, not visibly distorted, but distinctly layered, multiple complete hand sets occupying precisely the same spatial volume simultaneously, overlapping transparently yet moving independently. My brain repeatedly attempted and repeatedly failed to resolve the visual input into any normal human digit count. I counted, lost track, restarted counting, still unable to reconcile. Suddenly, the figure rotated toward our position. Perceived distance between us collapsed instantaneously in a manner impossible to describe accurately as ordinary locomotion. Neither running nor walking occurred. The intervening gap simply ceased existing, closing rapidly and incorrectly, until proximity became close enough to observe individual raindrops striking the entity's surface, only to flow upward against gravity in direct defiance of physical law. Instinctively, I grabbed Randy's sleeve and we plunged sideways into the forest interior. Tree density quickly grew sufficient to muffle external rain noise, reducing it to irregular drips falling from overhead branches. I swept my headlamp low ahead, scanning constantly for roots, rocks, or other tripping hazards. Roughly 30 yards deep into the woods, we encountered a large cedar that had toppled years earlier, creating a natural overhang shelter along one hollowed side. Beneath that sheltered space appeared a neatly folded pile of clothing items, not scattered haphazardly, deliberately arranged with visible care. I crouched low and directed light onto the stack. Bottom layer consisted of a blue rain jacket spread perfectly flat. Khaki-colored hiking pants rested directly atop the jacket. Lightweight trail running shoes had been placed side by side immediately adjacent, laces neatly tucked inside each shoe. Positioned centrally atop both shoes sat an open brown leather wallet, card still inserted, driver's license clearly visible bearing name David Austin, age 44, residential address listed in Port Angels. I carefully inspected jacket exterior and pants fabric. No visible bloodstains, no rips, tears, or obvious damage present. Garments had not been violently removed. They had been methodically taken off and placed intentionally. Randy stood close enough behind me that I could hear his controlled breathing pattern. "Those belong to him," he stated quietly. "Yes, they do," I confirmed. Despite strong impulse, I deliberately refrained from touching the wallet. Some indefinable instinct warned that handling it would constitute crossing an invisible boundary or accepting an implied invitation. Instead, I simply photographed the entire arrangement using my own phone camera before stepping backward. Having processed enough serious trauma scenes over the years, I recognized immediately when circumstances indicate an individual has passed beyond any realistic possibility of recovery. This situation carried precisely that irreversible weight. I mentally filed the observation and continued forward movement. At that moment, Randy emitted a sudden non-verbal sound behind me, more guttural expulsion of air than actual word. I spun around instantly. He stood hunched forward at the waist, both hands positioned near, but not quite grasping, his own throat, fingers braced as though attempting to slide underneath some external constricting force, encircling his neck from outside. His feet performed small, unnatural backward shuffling movements, heels catching irregularly against forest floor, while his entire body slowly dragged rearward toward the lake direction in rhythmic, inexorable pulls, exactly as though something invisible had embedded a hook deeply and now steadily reeled line inward. I closed the distance in 2 rapid strides. No visible ligature or constricting object encircled his throat. Airway remained audibly pat. I could hear labored but partially successful breaths entering. Eyes appeared wide open and tracked my movement normally, positive neurological indicator. Nevertheless, his entire frame continued jerking backward in slow, deliberate, repeating surges, as though tethered and steadily pulled. "Randy!" I shouted while seizing both his shoulders firmly. He reached outward toward me. Then arms suddenly locked rigid straight down at his sides, while another foot of backward progress occurred. First priority, eliminate excess weight. I yanked open the quick-release buckle on his left shoulder strap. Mechanism resisted initially, required 2 forceful pulls. Waist belt next, entire pack dropped heavily to ground. I kicked it forcefully aside. Basic field principle. When unknown force pulls a person, immediately shed every possible pound of additional mass. From my own vest, I rapidly withdrew rescue rope. 40 feet of 8 static kernmantle line dyed bright orange, freshly inspected and recoiled after previous mission. Working quickly, I fashioned an improvised chest harness loop underneath both his arms, not textbook perfect, but adequately secure for emergency hauling. Then ran the working end around nearest substantial tree trunk. A solid Douglas fir measuring roughly 14 inches diameter at base, completing multiple friction wraps for mechanical advantage. During those few seconds, Randy slid backward another 6 inches. Branches directly behind his position began bending inward slowly. Not wind-driven movement, rain direction came from west, yet these particular limbs bowed distinctly eastward, directly toward Randy himself. While I watched 2 separate branches snapped cleanly, failure occurring purely from sustained gradual pressure rather than sudden impact. Both hands gripping rope tightly, I pulled backward with maximum strength. Rope refused to yield initially. Planting my right boot sole firmly against tree base for leverage, I leaned entire body weight rearward and hauled again, harder. Rope bit painfully into palms straight through glove material, inner padding compressing flat. Randy's heels dragged another single inch rearward before finally holding position. Arms began trembling from sustained effort. During third continuous minute of pulling, rope friction generated noticeable heat through synthetic glove layers, grip strength starting to degrade noticeably. Branch deformation behind Randy had intensified significantly. Multiple additional limbs now bowing inward under invisible downward and rearward pressure from some shapeless source impossible to track visually with any clarity. Deliberately, I avoided looking directly at whatever caused the motion, kept vision locked exclusively on Randy, continued applying constant tension. He produced a choked sound, not quite forming an actual word. Then suddenly, his entire body lurched violently forward, as though restraining line had been abruptly severed under extreme load. He stumbled directly into me, both of us collapsing together onto saturated forest floor. Rope immediately went completely slack within my grasp. Behind us, all branch movement ceased. Limbs slowly returned to normal positions in uneven stages. Randy breathed heavily, shallow yet undeniably present. Dark reddish-purple band of bruising already developing across front throat area. He pushed himself upright into sitting position, met my eyes directly, remained completely silent. "Are you able to walk?" I asked. He gave one firm nod. We stood and resumed movement. Finding the small maintenance building required perhaps 20 additional minutes of fast hiking. Structure sat offset from main lodge service access road. Low-profile green-painted metal-sided utility shed, typically used for tool storage and spare parts, accessed infrequently. Exterior door featured push-bar handle plus empty padlock hasp, lock itself absent. I shoved door open. We stepped inside. I pulled it firmly shut behind us immediately. Interior space remained small and sparsely equipped. Metal shelving units lining 3 walls, mostly bare except few scattered cans. 1 folded tarp, single bag bulk sand, workbench, positioned along back wall beneath wall-mounted utility lamp. On workbench surface beneath clear plastic clipboard rested older model boxy Motorola handheld radio. Charger cord plugged into wall outlet. Power indicator showing unit switched on battery gauge, reading approximately half capacity, sufficient for immediate needs. First action, secure entrance. Using multi-tool pliers, I jammed metal end sideways into door latch mechanism, forcing housing sideways, until internal components locked solidly, preventing push bar activation from outside. Next, I dragged nearest empty metal shelving unit, estimated weight around 60 pounds, across concrete floor until positioned flush against interior side of push bar door, creating effective barricade. Randy assisted wordlessly without requiring instruction. His mobility remained intact. That alone sufficed for now. I lifted radio handset, switched immediately to Channel 9, Universal Emergency Distress Frequency, depressed transmit button and spoke clearly, identified myself by full name, provided precise current location, requested immediate assistance, kept entire transmission concise and professional per dispatch protocol. Released button. Momentary static hiss. Then my own voice returned through speaker, exact phrasing, identical flat delivery tone, delayed approximately 2 seconds, sounding precisely as though someone had digitally recorded original message, then played it back almost instantly. I keyed transmit button second time. Search and rescue. This is Dakota Diaz I need. Before completing sentence, my original first transmission overlapped audibly, replaying verbatim. Then second partial transmission followed immediately on same delay, layering atop beginning of third message I had not yet begun sending. Carefully, I placed radio unit back onto workbench surface. Randy stood watching silently from opposite side of small room. He had heard entire sequence clearly, asked no questions. South-facing wall featured 9-pane window, small glass sections, separated by narrow aluminum muntin bars. I had registered its existence immediately upon entry. Now every single individual pane pressed completely full from exterior, covered entirely by what strongly resembled human hands, palms flattened directly against glass, fingers spread wide. Yet hands appeared distinctly layered, multiple complete palm and finger sets stacked transparently atop one another, each successive hand pressing downward onto preceding layer beneath. Combined effect rendered glass utterly black, not ordinary nighttime darkness, rather absolute filled absence where light should exist. Randy remained motionless. I stayed frozen approximately 2 seconds. Then moved quickly toward shelf-adjacent flare kit, small box containing 4 standard highway road flares. Removed one, cracked open striker cap, struck igniter tip sharply. Bright red chemical flame burst outward accompanied by sharp acrid sulfur compound odor instantly stinging nasal passages. I raised burning flare directly toward window. Every visible hand form withdrew simultaneously, uniform coordinated speed suggesting single controlling entity. Glass cleared instantly, revealing only rain-streaked darkness outside, water tracing thin vertical paths downward. Randy exhaled audibly behind me. Flare extinguished abruptly, not gradual fade, not sputtering weakening, simply ceased burning completely, as though invisible hand had closed tightly around flame, snuffing it instantly. Chemical compound remained noticeably warm, continued emitting light wisps of smoke, yet combustion had terminated entirely. Entire sequence lasted perhaps 4 seconds maximum. Throughout career, I had deployed road flares repeatedly, marking accident perimeters, creating emergency trail signals, illuminating night extractions. Standard burn duration reliably ranges 15 to 20 minutes minimum under all conditions. Never once witnessed instantaneous quench of that nature. Conclusion formed quickly. Visible light did cause temporary retreat, yet flare itself died immediately afterward. Entity remained present outside structure, still standing in pouring rain, still engaged in whatever activity I could no longer observe directly. Not frightened away, merely momentarily attentive. Mentally, I connected previous incidents, tunnel whistle blown, exact pitch deliberately returned moments later from deep darkness. Radio transmission, Own words replayed back on precise 2-second delay. Now road flare contacted, apparently studied, then extinguished. Emerging pattern crystallized clearly. We deploy tool or signal, entity observes closely, examines response, replicates input, modifies output. Realization landed with profound, cold certainty. "We have to exit this building immediately," I stated. Randy already nodded agreement. East wall featured secondary utility exit door, solid metal swinging outward. I had mentally noted its location upon initial entry. Now I unspooled approximately 30 feet of rescue rope remaining in vest pouch. Tied secure figure 8 follow-through knot around Randy's torso, not for technical belay, purely as emergency haul point should he be seized again. Opposite rope end, I fastened tightly around my own wrist, feeling somewhat absurd yet proceeding regardless. Pushed metal door open outward. Cold, driving rain struck faces instantly. Steady, relentless precipitation that had continued for hours, showing no sign of easing. Exterior tree cover grew densely close on this side, perhaps 20 feet distant, forming solid wall of Douglas fir and hemlock in near-total darkness. Service road curved gently southward, leading toward main lodge building. Faint orange lodge exterior lights glowed dimly through heavy rain, distance approximately quarter-mile. We advanced rapidly, not yet sprinting, staying low and close together, maintaining roughly 6 feet rope slack between us. Voice suddenly emanated from left side tree line, perfectly mimicking Jasmine Lee's distinctive briefing cadence. Measured, authoritative, official report rhythm she employs when reading incident details aloud. Words remained indistinct, yet overall shape and intonation matched unmistakably. I refused to slow pace or respond, continued forward. Voice shifted seamlessly, now replicating Randy's low, flat register, short, clipped phrases, my own name embedded somewhere within sequence. Randy walked directly beside me, remaining completely silent, not speaking whatsoever. Whatever produced sound clearly did not originate from him. "Don't answer it," I whispered preemptively. He gave no indication of intending to, he understood perfectly. Then my own voice emerged from tree line. That particular mimicry caused involuntary half-step hesitation, purely reflexive reaction. Hearing one's personal voice originating externally, disembodied from own body, produces uniquely disturbing psychological jolt. Intellectually, I knew source false, knew precisely my current location and actions, yet brain still stutters, momentarily processing anomaly. Replicated voice calmly discussed creek direction, suggested redirecting movement toward water, delivered in patient, measured tone I myself use when directing formal grid search patterns. I refused to engage or acknowledge in any way. Rope between Randy and myself remained taut. He stayed locked in perfect step beside me. We reached gravel surface of service access road, immediately broke into full run. Randy matched stride perfectly. Rain pelted face directly, loose stones shifted under boot soles, distant lodge lights grew steadily brighter and more distinct through enveloping darkness. Mimicked voices kept pace effortlessly, cycling continuously. Jasmine next, then Randy again, then my own voice, then near approximation slightly off in vowel pronunciation, as though still fine-tuning accuracy. All emanated from left rear quadrant. I ignored every single utterance completely, answered none whatsoever. Search and rescue training repeatedly emphasizes one core principle: never attempt negotiation or dialogue with any developing situation that has already clearly demonstrated hostile or deceptive intent. You do not pause to reason with raging floodwaters. You simply escape channel immediately. Identical logic applied here, different form of flood. Lodge-covered parking overhang arrived abruptly. Exterior incandescent lights cast warm yellow-white pools beneath protective canopy. Two separate couples stood near main entrance accompanied by rolling luggage. Single man wearing flannel jacket smoked cigarette casually against side wall. Perfectly ordinary people engaged in perfectly ordinary rainy evening activities. We dashed beneath overhang shelter, halted immediately upon boots contacting dry pavement. Mimicked voices terminated instantaneously, exact moment dry surface registered beneath feet. Not gradual diminishment, not trailing fade, simply switched off completely, television screen going black when power cord disconnects abruptly. I stood breathing heavily several seconds. Randy bent forward, hands braced on knees, recovering. Quick visual check confirmed. Upright posture, breathing present, eyes tracking normally. Sufficient condition. One couple near entrance stared openly. We doubtless appeared disheveled, soaked through, rescue rope still trailing from wrist. No visible evidence of successful mission completion. Backcountry hiking emergency, I offered minimally, no further elaboration provided. Man positioned against wall, already held cell phone outward, possibly recording or preparing to call. Through glass doors, lobby interior glowed brightly, front desk clearly visible. Randy straightened to full height, looked directly at me. Neither of us spoke immediately. Nothing clean or simple existed to articulate right then. We had successfully exited affected area. That single fact encompassed everything necessary at that moment. Standing beneath reliable artificial lighting, surrounded by normal civilian activity, while quarter-mile distant tree line remained silent and distant. I began unwrapping rescue rope from wrist, carefully recoiling wet line. Next morning at precisely 8:15, Jensen arrived at lodge. After previous night's events, we had secured overnight accommodations in one available guest room. Front desk manager provided complimentary key card immediately upon hearing serious backcountry emergency, without pressing for additional specifics. Observing Randy's facial appearance, she simply handed over access card silently. Room contained 2 queen beds plus bathroom featuring genuine hot running water. I sat directly on bathroom tile floor beneath maximum temperature shower spray for perhaps 20 full minutes, allowing water to cascade continuously. Clean sensation never truly arrived, merely reduced degree of filth, closest approximation available under circumstances. Jensen appeared noticeably shorter in person than telephone voice had suggested. He entered carrying spiral-bound notebook along with small digital voice recorder, placed both items neatly onto compact desk beside room window. Before commencing, he inquired whether coffee would be welcome. We accepted. He walked downstairs to lobby, returned shortly carrying 2 steaming cups, a performed small courtesy without making production of it. I appreciated that understated professionalism immediately. He requested taking my statement first. Randy positioned himself on far bed, sipped coffee quietly, offered no interruptions. Jensen asked me to begin recounting events starting from moment of arrival at trailhead parking area, proceeding chronologically step by step. I complied fully, maintaining level, dispassionate delivery, identical to method used when handing off patient details to attending physician inside emergency department. Strictly sequential facts presented, deliberately avoiding subjective commentary. Embellishment wastes valuable time while sounding suspiciously like persuasion attempt. Jensen recorded steadily, interjecting precise clarifying questions when necessary. He displayed zero visible reaction upon hearing descriptions of stick nests, arranged teeth collections, disembodied voice speaking Randy's name from deep tunnel darkness. Every detail noted evenly without judgment. Restraint I valued far more than expected. When reaching description of shoreline figure, he requested hand details restated specifically. Layered appearance, I clarified. Multiple separate hands occupying identical spatial coordinates simultaneously, palm layered over palm, yet each set demonstrating independent subtle movement. He lifted gaze from notebook, looked directly at me, then wrote single word "yeah" before continuing without further comment. Reaching maintenance building rope incident, he requested deliberate slowdown, desired minute specifics regarding Randy's exact physical condition, choking sensation described, backward dragging motion, subsequent bruising pattern observed. He inquired whether possible Randy had inadvertently snagged clothing or gear on unseen branch in darkness, causing self-induced imbalance. I stated clearly, I stood immediately adjacent entire time, observed directly, no such entanglement occurred. He recorded response without debate. Randy's separate statement required considerably more time overall. His natural communication style involves linear data delivery, concise factual progression without narrative flourish, normally ideal for debrief purposes. Jensen repeatedly prompted him to expand specific moments, backtrack slightly, provide additional sensory detail. Randy complied patiently throughout, voice maintaining same low steady register used during actual field operations. Sole noticeable vocal shift occurred when questioned regarding tunnel footsteps phenomenon. He paused briefly, stared toward blank wall several seconds. They synchronized perfectly with our exact pace, he stated. Not any form of echo, stopped moving precisely when we stopped. Jensen nodded once, wrote entry carefully. By time both statements concluded, clock approached 11 o'clock. Jensen capped pen, expressed appreciation for our time investment as though we had performed him personal favor, which technically speaking we had. He provided each of us business card, expressed neither explicit belief nor outright disbelief regarding account. That neutral stance felt entirely appropriate under circumstances. Search and rescue teams deployed at first morning light. Among personnel, I personally recognized Pete, rope rescue certification instructor, plus Carla, fellow graduate from Wilderness First Responder course completed 2 years prior. Teams thoroughly swept entire Barnes Creek vicinity, plus complete tunnel corridor length. Jasmine Lee accompanied as official duty ranger representative. No trace whatsoever of David Austin surface during search efforts. By daylight hours, I already anticipated negative result, yet deliberately withheld final acceptance until official confirmation arrived. Around 2 o'clock afternoon, Jensen telephoned, while Randy and I remained at lodge consuming sandwiches purchased from hallway vending machine. He informed me primary search operation yielded entirely negative findings, grid expansion scheduled commencing following day. Then mentioned additional discovery. Randy's external frame backpack located positioned upright inside tunnel entrance, resting upon dry gravel directly beneath rock overhang providing natural rain shelter. Pack I had personally unclipped and abandoned amid trees during previous nights. Escape now appeared carefully placed, frame completely clean, all buckles spotless, material dry despite surrounding saturation. I responded I possessed no additional commentary regarding that detail. One further item, Jensen continued, followed by brief but uncharacteristic pause. Object discovered inside pack, positioned atop remaining contents. I waited silently. Rescue whistle, orange body, attached lanyard, Fox 40 style. Confirmation matched exactly, device I personally carried continuously since initial SAR certification. Lost amid chaos during forest escape, hadn't consciously considered since. Jensen reported whistle appeared meticulously cleaned, all mud removed, lanyard wiped spotless, deliberately placed atop gear contents as though intentionally returned. Asked whether I could positively confirm ownership. I verified immediately. Promised return after standard evidence processing completed. I acknowledged politely, privately resolved never to accept device back into possession. David Austin never emerged from those woods. Expanded follow-up search operations continued additional 3 full days, eventually relocated exact campsite precisely, as originally described, tarp configuration unchanged, pack undisturbed, cold fire ring untouched. Nothing missing from site whatsoever, except Austin himself. Vehicle remained parked exactly where originally noted at trailhead. Emergency contact listed on permit, brother residing Spokane area. I possess no knowledge regarding specific information conveyed to family member, nor what appropriate phrasing could possibly encompass under circumstances. Official case classification remains open, categorized missing person, presumed lost within backcountry wilderness. Standard administrative language employed whenever no clearer resolution exists. Randy required approximately 6 weeks for complete physical recovery. Bruising along shoulder region plus left posterior back area manifested deeply, slow to develop full coloration, equally slow to fade completely. Follow-up medical appointments documented full clearance on paper records. During November, he sent brief text message stating decision to withdraw permanently from all SAR involvement. No elaborate explanation provided, no emotional elaboration, simply turning gear in today, thought you'd want knowing. I replied minimally, yeah, understood, okay. He continues performing regular employment duties without interruption. We maintain occasional contact, several messages exchanged monthly. He simply never returns to field operations. I never pressure or question reasoning. Because I stood directly beside him throughout that night, fully comprehend weight he continues carrying internally. Weight far from trivial or dismissible. Personally, I maintained regular ER shift schedule, kept all professional certifications current, continued responding to new search and rescue callouts whenever requested. Alternative version of myself might have taken extended leave, sought formal counseling, processed trauma systematically and properly, possibly resulting in healthier long-term decisions. Yet repeatedly same core thought resurfaced. Stepping away permanently would equate to voluntarily surrendering portion of identity carefully constructed over many years through dedicated effort. That potential loss registered as considerably more painful than returning to familiar routines. Therefore, I returned. Initially chose different trail systems, alternate park sectors, gradually transitioned back toward original familiar zones, eventually same sectors, same national park boundaries. To this day, I recognize specific section of Spruce Railroad Trail solely through distinctive sound Lake Crescent surface makes when wind blows across water at particular angle. Single deliberate change implemented within personal kit. Whistle no longer carried whatsoever. Remaining equipment stays identical in every respect: headlamp, rescue rope, multi-tool, complete medical supplies. Designated whistle attachment slot on search vest remains permanently empty. Signal mirror substituted when needed, or voice projection or radio communication. Team members have noticed absence, inquired directly. I respond simply, I don't like carrying them anymore. Explanation consistently proves sufficient to end discussion. Underlying reason remains straightforward and uncomplicated. I actively used whistle inside that tunnel. Something concealed within darkness clearly registered sound produced, then deliberately replicated identical pitch back toward us moments afterward. Later, during desperate forest escape while struggling desperately to survive, same entity evidently located dropped whistle, retrieved it, cleaned every trace of mud, then positioned device carefully atop Randy's abandoned pack at tunnel entrance, placed precisely where inevitable discovery would occur, resembling return of borrowed item, receipt acknowledging transaction completed, finished interaction. That particular detail haunts me most persistently, not layered hands pressed against maintenance building window glass, not cycling mimicry of familiar voices emerging from surrounding trees. Specifically, the deliberate study of whistle, followed by meticulous return, arranged neatly, cleanly, exactly where we would inevitably locate it. Entity did not merely pursue us that night, although pursuit certainly occurred. Yet pursuit represented only partial aspect. Far more significantly, it observed attentively, exactly as I observe patients systematically inside emergency department. Methodical approach, thorough documentation, zero wasted movement. It watched intently while we deployed available tools, tested our reactions to various stimuli, cataloged precisely what equipment we carried, identified items we instinctively reached for under extreme fear. I possess no knowledge regarding subsequent use of gathered information, no understanding of current activity level, if any persists. I simply refuse absolutely to provide additional lessons or demonstrations.